Good evening to us all. Thank you for joining us for this training. You're all welcome. Please just indicate if you can get me so that we confirm. Indicate if you can get me. So we kickstart the training. As we are Sana, Abishiru, and so on and so forth. Okay, there's indication that we are all live. Okay, thank you. Indications that we're all connected. So today we are starting a series of seminars on thesis writing. If you can see from my slide, we see that we have thesis writing guidelines, seminar 1. And this is because we have a series of seminars that we'll have to hold to guide students. I'm Tingon Ferdinand, a graduate from University of Buea. Since 2012, I've been assisting students with their academic works. I assist them as a data analyst. I've been assisting master's and PhD students with their research thesis. And in the course of this, I particularly find that most of the students, they find a lot of challenges going about how to write their thesis, even from conception, because partly the problem stems from the educational system, and partly because this is a scientific field that requires some key skills to be able to do it. And so in this series of trainings that we have earmarked, we are going to be guiding you step by step in the whole research process. So I believe that with that, we'll be able to groom a new generation of researchers who are able to analyze, who are able to carry out data, who are able to even conduct studies on their own and make good use. So thank you for joining. And our outline today, we'll be able to see how to capture, to bring up a research introduction. We'll talk about literature review, how you can go about reviewing the literature. We talk about research methodology, results and discussion, conclusion, recommendation, how to handle referencing, aspect of plagiarism, tools needed to be a good writer. However, this is a general outline. Today, our major focus will be more for the next 1 hour, 30 minutes or so. We'll focus with the introduction, which is principally the key focus, the starting point of any research work. It is very clear that getting started with research has always been a challenging task for most of the students. And whether you are a student or a supervisor, understanding how research process, the key aspects of a research is very, very important to be able to succeed in your writing. And once you want to start your research or formulate your research, you always have to have something in mind. And most research studies will begin with a question. There is a question that you want to research on. There is a field of interest. You have a passion in a particular domain that you basically want to find out. And so the first step in doing any research study is for you to ask yourself, what am I to research on? And for you to answer this question, the first thing is that you have to think about the topic of interest. Once you think of a topic of interest, you have to situate yourself in the context of what? Theories that you have studied. If you're a student, for instance, a management student will think of a theory of Maslow's theory of motivation. If you think of maybe employee performance and motivation. If you're interested in whatever field, the first thing is that, especially with the social sciences, where there is the basic in human behavior, you will be able to think through and to develop the key concepts about that. And the questions you must ask yourself, are there some questions questions, there's a gap, an unanswered part of your research methodology. So once you establish this, I always advise students that before you even start writing, the primary thing is that you need to go to literature. Literature is where you have to review what has been done already. And in literature, if you start your work without looking at literature, you'll face challenges. And most students always face challenges because you think of a topic and you start writing. But the rule of the thumb is that you have to go to literature. Why you are going to literature is to ensure that the topic, your area of interest, there is enough material. This is a thesis of about 200 pages. Or if you are PhD, 200 plus, masters maybe between 50 to 150, depending on the context. And so you go to literature. The reason why you are going to literature first is to identify key variables that you use in your study. Because in the literature, you know what others have done. If somebody has carried out a study, you see what the person used. The second thing is you need to understand the different methodologies that others have adopted. Because this will guide you on where you need to start your own research topic. So I always say the first part of your research is that you go to literature. Though you will see that in the course of writing, literature may come as the second chapter, depending on the context. But this is actually where your research work must begin. Don't just observe a problem and start writing. Because a research problem can either come from literature or by observation. Whether by observation or from literature, there is a need for you to review what others have done so that you know how to structure your own, so that you can get variables for your study. And so once you have done a brief review of literature, which will, in the course of our training, we'll see how you can go about reviewing literature, the different aspects of literature, the different types of literature that you can review, you'll be able to situate your own topic. And once you have done that, you can actually come up now with a proper introduction. Now, introduction generally is the first chapter of your research test. Please, for those who have, can you just mute yourself, please? Please, if you just mute yourself. Sorry for that. Now, dissertation. And essentially, this is where you draw the attention of the reader. Whenever I go to do research, the first thing is that when I read the first sentence, the first 2 or 3 lines of any research topic, it tells me whether it's a journal article. I will go ahead and download the article or not. Apart from saying we can get information from the abstract, the brief introduction, the key part of the introduction is very, very essential. And this is where you set the stage for the research work with a clear purpose. You must have a purpose, something that is guiding you, that this is what this study is all about. This is what you are out to achieve. So there must be what? A clear purpose. You must have a clear purpose and a direction. Regardless of the situation of your study, a research topic has some key aspects. I mean, the research introduction has some key aspects. We have the background, we have the problem, we have the research questions, we have objectives, we have significance of the study, organization of the study. That is the key aspects of a research. Now, there are more, depending on if different universities may add other aspects to it, but essentially, these are the key aspects. And in this particular presentation, we'll focus on these key aspects, how you are able to structure each and every part of this aspect. For instance, we say the background. The background is the first part of your work. There are different approaches to handle the background. For instance, there are researchers who advocate for a historical presentation, conceptual, theoretical, and contextual. On the other hand, we have other researchers that say you need to take from the world's view, the continental level, the country level, and your specific level. Whatever approach you want to adopt, there are certain things that we will discuss in this lecture that are relevant for you. For instance, let's take the first aspect that you're writing about COVID-19, and you want to use the funnel shape approach. Now, what you will notice is that though COVID-19 may seem as a very broad topic, you want to see a certain aspect. However, you have to start with a general overview. The worldview could be something of this nature. COVID-19 is a disease that started in China. When it started in China, people started dying because it's
I said, babe, when was the last time you spoke with him? Why all of a sudden discussion you are in your court? I do not. What talking now waiting for you and him?
Wonderful. For it to come and get rotty here, is a plum knife. People should make some of that.
I tell you, saying me, I don't make. That be the talk, that talk, I know we know say you go here. You got it from a different angle. I say you interpreted it, not that was not my intention. I did struggle for babe. You interpret now some other thing. Why I would make you and M get a difficult relationship? No, you always get things twisted. That is my problem with you.
Eat now, Jarvis. Eat. Where?
But interpret you in a different way now.
I say now the talk so master.
Recording in progress. Progress.
Please, do you get me? Okay, do you get me? Please, just indicate. Somebody should indicate if you can get me.
Yes, so we're getting you.
Okay. Yes. So we start with the historical background. Now, generally, if you come from social scientists or from the social field, especially education and University of Where in particular, that when they want to write a background, they emphasize the aspect of using from the historic, where you trace the origin of your problem, which we'll see when we get to the problem statement. We try to give an evolution. That's why if you see even the COVID-19, you can start by saying it started in 2019, the last part of 2019, and from the back, you see how it has been emerging, the different mutations, the different stages, the different reactions from countries around the bar level, the country level, and so on and so forth. You are giving a brief explanation to the origin. Because when you're writing the background, the first thing you must have in mind is that the researcher or your reader is not aware of the topic. You must assume that you are trying to educate your audience or your reader about this particular area of interest. And so as you do that, you help him or her to be able to situate. So in everything you are doing, you are building up information for the researcher to be able to actually carry out the study or read your work and understand. And to do that, you may give an evolution of the problem. You may use concepts to define the key concept that emerge from your topic. And you can also situate your topic in the context of what? Theories. There is a theoretical part, or maybe theoretical context that you want to lead your study. You are studying motivation and you want to follow maybe the Maslow's ideology, or you are following the X and Y ideology. You must bring in some theories that situate your study. However, at the introduction, one of the things you must understand is that with the introduction, you just give in brief. You are not writing everything. You just establish what? A foundation And so they need to educate the reader about this, establishing relevance. And you must do it with a lot of facts. That's why you have to review what others have done, what has been said, and to establish maybe where your problem actually comes in. You have to now go to the last part, which is the context. Now, the problem may be global, but you don't want to study the problem at a global level. There is a local level that you want to study the problem. That's why we have the aspect of contextualization. Context means where are you dealing? What necessitates this particular study in your area of interest? It could be a geographical location or simply a scientific field that you want to fill a gap. And so it's very, very important for us to examine our study from that dimension. Now, once you have done that, with the introduction, the next thing, or with the background, the next thing for you is to now actually indicate the necessity of this problem, which leads us to the problem statement. There is a problem that we actually want to be able to solve. And so, the next part of your research topic will be the problem statement. Now, in stating the problem statement, I have a guideline. You must start with a structure in mind. There must be a structure that you have in mind. And with a structure, there are key things you want to establish. First, the context of your study. There is a context that you want to establish. We have issues that you must raise, establish of this, and the specific objective. For instance, when you're writing a research, the dependent variable, because your problem actually emanates from what the example for us to follow. Now, we have a simple example. The human body is depleted of hydration after exercise. When you do an exercise, you lose a lot of electrolytes, and because of that, there is a need for you to do what? To rehydrate. That is called the context. There is a context that you are trying to establish. After the problem you identify is what? Dehydration after exercises. Now, because of this hydration, there are certain things if we don't do, we'll run into, right? And so there is a need for us to replenish the lost electrolytes in our system. And because of that, we need to look for the best way to solve this problem. That is now what? The person who is carrying out the study or who has been dehydrated needs to do what? To decide the best way to rehydrate the system and to replenish the lost energy. That is what the issue that you believe that needs to be handled. Now, there are different ways to solve this problem. That's why not all beverages. Now, you have discovered that the process of rehydration warrants you maybe to use some beverages. But the problem you face or the problem you have identified as a researcher is that not all beverages give the same capacity of rehydration, right? For instance, you want to ensure that there should be rehydration. The question is which rehydration agent is the best? Now, once you have established this, you are bringing in the relevance of the problem. The first is the context, the issue at stake, and why it is important for us to solve this problem. Once you establish the why it is important for us to solve this problem, the next thing you want to do, the next thing for you now is to establish your objective. The objective becomes what? The most important part that you want to verify. This is where you really want to establish the relevance of your study by saying, yes, there are so many different aspects, but this is my domain of interest. In this experiment, we will investigate the electrolyte content found in standard spot drain and compare that to what? What is found in plain water. What are you saying in effect? We can do rehydration using water. We can do using recommended spot drills. But as a researcher, you have a worry. You don't know which one has the best rehydration energy or the ability to rehydrate your client well. And this now warrants a study. So in effect, with a problem statement, you basically start from your dependent problem, which is where the source of the problem is, and you establish the context where there is a limitation or what has been done. Maybe according to other researchers, they have discovered that we can use beverages to rehydrate. But the problem now is that we have so many beverages in the market and we don't know which one is actually the best. And so you want to now take one and compare. We want to take two and compare. And this leads us to another interesting part of the research problem or the research study, which is coming up with specific objective. Because once you pick up a topic, basically it is general. The whole topic is general, but you must narrow it to a certain domain. And for you to do that, there are some guidelines that help you. And to do that, we have key research questions that you must establish. You go to the aspects of research question. Now, it is important for you to understand that most often there are three types of research question in every study. Can you mute yourself, the person that has some background sound, please? So there are three types of research questions. Whether you're a supervisor or a student who wants to do your thesis, or you are a researcher or a data analyst, you want to be helping students, it's important for you that, especially with quantitative study, there are three types of research questions. And these research questions inform you on how your data will be analyzed and which research methodology is the best. What are we saying? The research questions helps you to establish your research objective, help you to establish your research hypothesis, helps you to know how to review your literature, helps you to know which research design will you adopt, how your data, which instruments you are best up for your data collection, and how your data can be analyzed. So this is a critical part of your research process, which you must take into account. Now, generally, we have the first part, which is our main research objective or our main research question, which basically represent the main topic. But you must bring in the specific research questions. The specific research question can be of these three types: descriptive. With descriptive research questions, you basically want to describe a situation, in which case you don't need to have a dependent and independent variable. For instance, let's assume that you are studying the demographics of a region. You're in Kenya, and so you pick up you are the mayor, and you want to maybe distribute some services, and you want to understand the demographic distribution of the indigents. The first thing you may want to know them by their age. You may want to know them by their income level. You may want to know the gender distribution, and so on and so forth. Such a study warrants what? Simple descriptive research questions. Now, you may want to do a comparative analysis. You want to compare and see if one substance is more efficient. For instance, in the hospital, let's assume that there are different treatments for malaria. And as a doctor, you have been giving out these treatments at random, but you are worried. You don't know which one is actually good at treating malaria the best. Yes, we know all of them might be treating malaria, but it's one that is 90%, 95%. We talk about efficacy rate. As you see, when COVID-19 came out, we started hearing to talk about the first vaccines, they were 95, 90. What are we trying to say? We want to compare now and see which one has a higher potential to give you the optimal results. In such a situation, we are taking what? Comparative research questions. The what if. What is the difference between this? For instance, if we go back to our research problem, you basically see that this research problem warrants that we may do what? A comparative analysis, because we want to compare the rehydration rate of standard spot drink with what? Using natural water to rehydrate. These are just simple examples for you all to see. Okay, let me see. The person said has challenges to meet. Okay, so We talk about the 3 research questions. We've talked about the comparative. And with the comparative research question, one thing you need to understand as a researcher is that you can compare 2 groups that are similar. And when you are comparing 2 groups that are similar, the analytical technique that you have to use will be maybe using the independent sample t-test. However, you are using the paired sample t-test because there are similarities between the groups, right? We call it related or paired data. If you're comparing 2 groups that are totally independent, for instance, you want to compare the amount of water intake in Buya, if there's a difference between the amount of water intake in Buya between male and female, we can use the independent sample t-test. This is trying to make you to understand how your research questions influence how your data will be analyzed, which analytical technique will be best up for you. So as a student who wants to go about analyzing your data, it is recommended, or to carry out your study, it's recommended that you check your research questions, because the research questions will inform how your data will be analyzed. And so if you are taking descriptive, you know that most of the analytical technique you use will be the descriptive tools. But if you are taking comparative, you know, and you need to know which type of comparison are you doing. Are you doing compare 2 things that are similar? Maybe in different situations, if you are doing what? An intervention study where you have the before and the after, you want to do a paired related study. Or you are doing what? A control and an experimental group. If you have more than 2 groups, it tells you that you may want to use Anova. Some of these things you must think over when you are still developing your research. But it is important for me to indicate that the introduction, some researchers advocate that it is the last that you have to write. Actually, what we are doing from the first writing is just what? A guide. Excuse me. At the end of the day, you have to come and develop. So the research process is not very much a straight line approach. You go ahead, you come behind, you review literature, you write your methodology section, and maybe you go to the field, come back, you have to affect certain things in your whole process. So it's a continuous process. But having a pre-knowledge of how your data will be collected or the type of analysis you want to get helps you to be able to structure your research questions well. And with good research questions, with your variables explicitly established, it will enable you to able to go ahead and collect and analyze your data with ease. As a data analyst, I've faced a lot of challenges where students go and they collect data. Once they bring back the data, you check their research questions, their research objectives, and the data they're collected are totally different. What do you do? Supervisor said no. You have to go back to the field, and so it's costly. So it established the necessity of us trying to do what? How your objectives fit in, how your questions fit in, how your problem fits in, how your methodology fits in. So it is important for you to see through this process from the beginning, and that's why we are undertaking this training to guide you step by step on how you can go about the research process. If you are a supervisor and you want to guide a student, it's obvious that you need to see and look at the research question and say, based on your research question, this is the type of technique you use. I recently had an encounter with a student who went to the field and collected data and came back with the data and needed that we assist him or her. That we assist her, brought the data and said, my supervisor said I should use Anova. I said, but why is it that your supervisor said Anova? I said, no, you only said I should use Anova. I said, but look at your data. If you look at your data, you will discover that from your data, all of your data is categorical in nature. But if you check the assumptions of Anova, one of the conditions that before you use Anova is that your dependent variable must be continuous and you must have at least 2 groups before you do comparison using Anova. I said, but based on your data, you will not be able to use Anova. And so this is what researchers and data analysts they go through when maybe the supervisor is imposing for you to use a particular technique and you did not consider it when you started up setting your research question, when you are designing your instruments to collect data. So it is very, very important for you to know how your research instrument establish your research questions. The first step is that you must choose the type of study you want to collect. Is it a quantitative study or a qualitative? Now let's assume that you are taking a qualitative. If you are taking a qualitative study, you must equally decide whether you are doing a descriptive analysis or you want to simply do a descriptive study, or you are doing a comparative study, or a relationship question that has to do with effect. Take, for instance, if you are doing a relationship question, one of the things is that you must have at least two variables. You must have two variables to compare, right? If you are doing a comparative study, to examine the effect of one on another, or the relationship between variables. That's where you start thinking of correlation or regression or similar analytical technique. But if you are doing a comparative study, one of the things you must undertake is that you must have at least two groups. Please, when you are in, try to mute your mic, please. There's noise and it's disturbing. So always try to put off your mic, please. It's very necessary. Sorry, we keep having some network challenges, but I believe we're good to go. The network is really poor, but I'm sure. So, okay. I hope we're all okay. We don't have any challenge. If you have any challenge, indicate. Now, we ended before the network steps. You're talking about choosing the type of research question. And we said we have descriptive, comparative, or relationship effect type. And I was explaining what you need to consider when you have such a research type. You need to consider, because from the type now once you identify the type of research questions or how you want to, you identify the different types of variables. Now, I assume that we already understand what a variable is, but just a brief. A variable in a research is any attribute of the research that has a tendency to change. That will take on more than two values. For instance, if I say gender, possibly the two primary things that come to your mind is either male or female, right? If I say age, you can talk about the young, the old, and maybe the adult. And so you see that we see variables from this dimension. So a variable has a tendency to take on at least two options. Now, once you identify the variables in your study, it helps you to know which one is your dependent and which is the independent variable. Because the purpose of a research study is to manipulate the independent variable and see how it affects the dependent variable in most cases. Now, this is a one method fit all, but generally, we are having our independent variable to increase the independent variable and see how the outcome variable will behave, which is now what? The dependent variable. So you must identify the key variables, or you identify the key parties involved. If we're doing comparison, we may have two groups of persons or two groups of things. to choose between them. Now, once you have done this, you need to select the appropriate structure of the chosen type of research question. For instance, when we are doing our data analysis training, we always take time to go through how you can actually structure a research question. For instance, if we're talking about the descriptive research questions, we have what proportion, what is, what frequency, and so on and so forth. You just have to do the descriptive. And so we take you through this approach. So you select the appropriate structure to base your research question and the various variables and groups involved. Now you have to write out that question in the proper format. So basically, that is what you do when you are developing research question. Remember, if you go back to our example on the problem, now we'll see that based on what we did earlier, we can see that our independent variable here, we could be looking at the dependent variable with the aspect of rehydration. We want to see how we can rehydrate. And we're comparing between two, we're doing a comparative study to see between standard sport drinks and natural plain water, which one has the higher propensity or the higher capacity to rehydrate faster or better. Now, there are two things that we must consider also. One has a higher capacity, or they all behave the same. And that's why in research, we talk about the significant difference or the significant effect when we are looking at our work. And so once you do that, you are now going to translate your research question into objectives. Now, the purpose of research objectives, as we see from my slide, is to serve the researcher to identify the appropriate research design. I know I've stated this earlier. Your research questions give you direct research objectives. That's why most researchers advocate for what? One-on-one mapping. Each research question should be linked to each research objective and to each research hypothesis. That must not be the same in all cases, but generally or most of the time, that is what others advocate. Now, once you identify that each question is mapped to each research objective, you are able to see which research will be the best for your study. For instance, let's take the case of descriptive research design or descriptive research question. Basically, one of the research designs or the things you must consider is that you'll be thinking of using what? The survey design. And if you have to use the survey design, you might possibly want to use a questionnaire. You decide whether it be a structured questionnaire or unstructured questionnaire or semi-structured, depending on your case and how you want to study your problem. But if you are doing a comparative analysis like what we have now, we may want to go to what? Experimental design, right? Or quasi-experimental. Maybe we'll have to take maybe different groups of persons, separate them into two equal groups, and administer maybe one with a special, after the exercise that they have undergone the exercise, we give one the recommended drinks for sport tasks to rehydrate, and another we simply give natural water. Thereafter, we measure the rate of rehydration and see if there exists any differences, which one performs better, or they're all at the same. So with such, you see how your research question or your research objective informs you on the research design that is most appropriate. And your research, another thing that a research objective does is that it helps to identify the variables necessary for your study. It has to do what? The variables. You use your research objectives to identify the variables. If we look at our study, we'll have the standard drinks, and we also have what? Maybe the other variable we may want to consider will be plain water. And we are examining the effect of these two on rehydration, right? So basically, your research objective helps you to do that. And lastly, your research objective helps you to know the procedure to collect your data. Are you going to use the survey design where you have to survey people's opinion, their experiences, their feelings, their attitude, their perception, and so on and so forth, with respect to a particular situation? You may want to survey people's opinion with respect to putting on face masks, right? Or their reaction towards COVID-19, where we say, or you want to assess. So basically, the research objective tells you how your data will be collected, and adding to that, how your data will be analyzed. And data analysts, they must understand how all of this play in. Now, the next thing is, I just have a sample here One of the things you want to do with your research objectives is that you want to make them what? Measurable, and you are able to actually capture them. For instance, you use keywords like you assess, you identify, you determine, you examine, you establish, right? Those are the keywords that you must use when you are, because those are words, they are action oriented. And so you want to either assess the knowledge, the attitude or practices towards COVID-19, for instance, or people starting with COVID-19 vaccine. You want to assess their level of awareness, maybe their perception regarding COVID-19 vaccine, or you want to identify maybe barriers to the vaccine. Maybe there are religious conditions, people don't want to take vaccination, there's a lot of propaganda in the air, this and that. You are carrying out a study, and so you see that identify key barriers. Right there, you are doing what you're trying to identify. You see the word identify, it stands out. So you must establish these keywords when setting your research objective. It's very, very important for you to understand how this key structure or structuring your work will help you to make progress. Once you've done that, you can use that to formulate your hypothesis. Generally, research hypotheses are what? Assumptions before you go to the field to collect data. And they emanate from your data, from your problem. If we go back to our problem with respect to the drinks, you may assume that there is no significant difference between the rate of rehydration between the standard sport drinks and plain water. That's your assumption. Please, for those who are scientists or who are in this field, please, this is just a simple example for the sake of what? Understanding our lecture. We're not giving you what? A principle now you want to go and your specific study and your specific variable will tell you how you can structure them. But we're saying that you can use your research questions or objectives to be able to formulate your hypothesis. And your hypothesis, if you are going to a quantitative study, you always have to talk about significant difference or significant effect, right? Which will warrant you to use some inferential techniques. Yes, you need to use some inferential techniques. After you have done all the descriptive analysis, you now have to verify. What you have gotten from your data, can it be generalized to the population? Remember, nobody's really interested in your sample. The data you have collected, nobody's interested in the sample unless you have informed the person about the whole research study. And for it to be able to inform the whole research, maybe to generalize to the population, there is a need for it to be generalizable. You should be able to make generalization. You should be able to make inference. And so we start talking about the sample size being a representation of the population. These are things we discuss in detail as we progress, maybe in our subsequent lectures as we take on research methodology, the different methodologies, the different approaches that we can go about analyzing the data, how we can different sample methods, how you affect them, and advantages and disadvantages as a researcher or as a student who is conducting a study, as a supervisor of students to supervise. You must understand how all of this play. If you don't understand how this come into play, how they influence your analysis, you may have wonderful analysis, but the results are irrelevant. For instance, it's not uncommon for me to pick up some work and see that the student was looking for average for gender. It's unheard of. You cannot add male and female and have a new, so you can get an average. So basically, if you're using a statistical technique, they may give you an average, but that average is of no value. So it's important for us to understand some of these basic things that surround our studies so that we don't make mistakes and we improve our ability of succeeding in the research work. The next thing, after talking about the problem, you've identified your questions, you formulated your objectives, and you have to come to significance. Every study must be relevant. You're not conducting a study just because you feel as to conduct a study. You're conducting a study because it's relevant. And as you look at significance in terms of theoretical significance, practical significance, policy recommendation, or to a body. If you're conducting a study to improve the performance of a company, first, the findings from that study will be relevant to the organization. It will be relevant to the management to improve maybe their management structure, maybe to improve their customer system, and so on and so forth. You must bring in the relevance of this study. If you go back to example, we understand that if we successfully carry out the study and see which rehydration ingredient is better between the standard recommended from the companies and water, then it goes a long way to improve the athlete's health, because they can quickly rehydrate their system using the best option, right? So it's important for the athletes, because at the end of the day, they will know which one to. It's important for the coach to know which to recommend. It's important for the team to know which one to buy. You actually have to establish the importance. Now, the theoretical aspect of their significance has to do with adding to literature. What are you adding? Based on your theory, you know we have a school of thought that you are following. And based on that school of thought that you are following, you need to add something. Maybe there's a need to modify Maslow hierarchy theory of needs. Because the higher people now, maybe somebody is at self-actualization, still wants to get more houses and so on and so forth. It's quite like, wait, initially we said, when you are looking for a house, it makes you happy, and when you get at top, maybe you are not more interested in some of these things. Just as an example, you may want to see that after conducting a study, they may need to modify an existing theory or add to existing theory or formulate a new theory or stipulate a new theory. Now, if you see that we're dealing with quantitative study, most quantitative studies are directed towards testing a hypothesis, testing a theory. Qualitative studies are aimed at what? Formulating a theory, which means you basically do not assume, you don't have hypothesis. Your data gives you a theoretical underlying ideology. And this ideology needs to be verified now using what? Data collected from a large sample size using a standardized instrument like the questionnaire. And so it's important for you to bring out this study. If we are doing data analysis or in a data analysis training, I actually want to talk more about practical significance and statistical significance, because there are some differences in this field. There are some differences, and understanding how they play a role is relevant. However, at this particular point, we are only trying to understand the thesis writing. So, in sum, what have we been saying as the introduction? All along, we've been talking about the introduction. We mentioned the background, that the background is important because it informs your audience. It informs your reader about your subject. You are teaching them. You want to educate them by bringing in the historical evolution, by trying to examine some key concepts, defining maybe some key terms in brief, and you equally want to give a theoretical underline, but this theoretical principle may be more applicable for the social scientists, social science researchers, or like the pure sciences, and maybe animal sciences may be different, that they may not have theories to. But if you are dealing with the humanities, you may likely have some theories that informs your thought of reasoning. And from there, you need to establish your problem. And we've said for you to establish your problem, you have to look at it in terms of the context, the key issue at stake, the relevance, and what if it's not solved, what could be the consequences of that. And then you also have to talk about what? The aspects of your key objective. Based on the problem you have identified the gaps in literature. And so what do you want to do to be able to solve this problem? And so that is how you are looking at it and see how you formulate your background and your problem. From the problem, you talk about the objectives and how you can, the type of research objectives you want to have, or the type of research question, how you take research questions to formulate hypotheses, and from there, how these objectives informs you about your methodology and how you can even go about reviewing your literature. So I said in sum, your background must be able to provide you some key information. The first thing is that as you are writing or you pick up your thesis, you must have a topic. We talk about a topic having maybe the key variables, the dependent and the independent variable, and your essence is to verify any assumption that undermine. Please, we'll get to the section for questions. If you have your question, just put it. Immediately we're done, we'll give room for questions. So thank you for your questions. We'll get to the part of questions and elaborate. And so it's an interesting question. When we get there, please, we'll talk more as the questions to help you understand better. Now, if you are following us on YouTube, you can equally drop your questions and we'll review it and we answer as we continue. Now, the next aspect is, what does the reader, in some way saying that, what does the reader need to know to understand the thesis, right? That has to do with the topic and the context. Now, the focus and the scope. What specific aspect of the topic will you be addressing? This is guided by what? Your concepts, your location, which has to do with maybe geographical location, theoretical consideration, and what? Your specific objectives. The relevance and justification. How does the research fit into existing works in that field? You must establish the relevance. Is it theoretical relevance or practical relevance? So you must be able to do that from your introduction. Then we talk about the questions and what we want to find out. And you may end by giving what? A whole structure, an overall structure of the whole research process. Right? Now, like we said, you must note that this varies with universities, levels, and maybe bodies. For instance, there are some universities that will say your background, your chapter 1 must have the background, or we say our chapter 1 will be general introduction, we have specific introduction, maybe introduction, we have background to the study, we go to problem statement, we have research objectives, research hypotheses, research questions, significance and justification, or justification as an independent heading, we have scope or delimitation, we have definition of key concepts, organization of the work, and so on and so forth. So the requirements may differ, but principally what we have done are the key things that are relevant for you to consider when you are picking up a thesis, or as a supervisor, as a student who wants to, or even a term paper. Some of what we are discussing goes with term papers or journal articles that you are writing. These are the key things. So it doesn't really matter the field that you come from. Some of these things must cut across. There are some universities that all of what we have, your introduction will carry a brief of literature, your methodology, and the rest of the chapters are formulated based on objective. I recently did some work with a student from Poland, and what we are working on was basically trying to, we see that all our introduction carry methodology was attached to it, literature review attached, and chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and they all had to do with specific objectives, how we are reviewing the objectives and how our findings came into play. So we're not giving a method that goes for everybody, rather we're just giving a standard approach. So keep your questions as we get to now, once you are done with the introduction, you can now go now to review the literature. Now, for the literature, since we said we are just basically giving an outline for today, we might not dwell much on the literature. But in our subsequent lectures, we'll be able to take a section like the literature review and give you the different types of literature review, and how you can go about, how do you actually go online, how do you actually get the relevant material, how do you search the right scientific databases for your study, because you may have a wonderful topic, but you go online, you are unable to identify the right sources or the right material to review for your work. So we'll do that. But however, today we are saying that literature review is basically divided into 3 parts. The first thing you need to understand about literature review, that literature review is important because it establishes the relevance of your study in the context of studies have already been done, right? People have already conducted studies, but you want to bring in your own aspect now. And so others have already been done. So you want to establish what? A research gap. That's why when we get to literature, we talk about gaps identified. And we'll talk about gaps as we progress. Talk about gaps. Now, there are key things for you to help you in establishing your literature. 1, the conceptual reviews. With the conceptual review, principally what you do is that you define key concepts. You define key concepts as others have done. You're not only defining, you try to establish how this key concept. For instance, you are doing studying customer satisfaction. You may want to see how customer satisfaction is defined. A, define customer satisfaction as this is, B, define as this is, and how do you define it with respect to your study? So the aspect of concepts basically wants to help you to establish key concepts, right? Now the next thing is we have research the theoretical part. This is where theoretical framework has to do with, some people divide it into theoretical literature, theoretical framework. In whatever case, basically you have some theories that are guiding you and you want to establish this theory. If the theory will inform you to pick up variables for your objective. That's why we said literature review is important. And the last part is empirical. Empirical is practical studies. Studies that people actually went to the field, carry out, and they came and analyzed their data and what established. So you want to review what others have actually done. That is done under empirical review. So I have a good number of questions. We'll take the questions as we progress. I'm sure let me just review outline. Okay. In the next 10 to 20 minutes, I'm sure we'll be running off to take your questions. Just prepare your questions as we get there, be able to handle your questions. The next thing is that once you have established the literature review is really very important. Though we are not talking about literature review here in details because we will still have to. Even the introduction we did, we just did in brief because we can take a whole section just dissecting problem statement, bringing different samples. So I recommend that you sign up in our next training so that we take samples. We want it to be practical. One of the things First Links Academy does is that we believe in bringing practical. Most of our trainings, whether data analysis training or whatsoever, we try to be 90% practical, 10% theory. So we are not into too much theoretical perspective. We focus on actually doing it. And so since we are dealing with something like thesis writing, our subsequent lecture, when we pick up something like a problem statement, we have to bring different samples. We'll present to you bad research objectives, poor research objective, poor research problem, maybe, and so on and so forth. So you will see how you can do it the right way, how you can actually do it, how you can assess another person's objective as a data analyst. If somebody brings his objective and say, please help me and coin my objective there, how do you go about that? We can have actually take you step by step to enable you understand how this works. Now, the next important part that you need to understand as a researcher is the methodology. The research methodology. This is one of the most interesting topics. I always say this is the most difficult research topic. In most theses, it is the shortest chapter, maybe after chapter 1, or maybe even shorter than chapter 1. But for me, this is the most difficult part of the work. This is the part of the study that makes your work uniquely yours. You can copy literature review, so to say, the word copy, which means you are basically reviewing people's opinion. But when it gets to methodology, it is what you have done that somebody can replicate. Which design did you use? Did you use a survey design? Or it was a quasi-experimental or pure experimental? You talk about design. Was it descriptive in nature? Or we are doing qualitative nature and we have the what? Phenomenal design. There are different designs. So you must explain your design. And one thing about this section of your study is that it is very, very practical, and every step you take must be justified. You must say why you think that the survey research design is the best for your work. What makes you think that the first design is the best? Is it because others have been using it and you think that no, because others have been using it, it's ideal for you to use it? Or you think that others have been using the survey, so you think that using survey now might not be ideal, so you have chosen another design. Others have been doing this study, actually studying this particular topic using quantitative study, and you think it'd be good for you to go towards qualitative. So you must justify the relevance of anything you do as your methodology section is concerned. You can be in a chapter, or it's not a chapter, you must be able to justify. So if you take a survey design, what is a survey design? You must not go about defining. Some people will say define it, explain what it is, and then you choose. Or some people, I've seen so many cases, having been doing this since 2012, I see a lot of different approaches. At times, like, I don't even know which one is right, because today, this one is good for B, totally wrong for C. And so you still have a lot of controversies, but as much as a researcher, you must be able to survey literature and see what actually prevails for most of the persons. So anything you take or any particular aspect of your research methodology must be given a justification. Now you are studying COVID-19 and you choose a certain population. Your population embodies everybody or all the elements that you want to collect data from. That is a population. And population is so important that you must get the right population to provide information for your study, right? So once you get the wrong population, they may provide answers to you. Those answers will not be able to. Remember, when you carry out a study and they collect the data, analyze the data, and implement the findings should be able to solve your desired problem. But if you have a problem and you get information from the wrong people and they provide you with answers, remember that the answers may seemingly be right, but they will not be able to solve the problem because the people who provided responses to you are not ideal. Maybe they are not knowledgeable. Maybe they are not the ones that have experience. Remember, if you want to talk about experiences of people in a war, now you go to people who have been getting information about a war that is fighting, maybe they're fighting a war around them, and they just hear stories. The information the person will tell you is different from someone who was actually at the war front, who actually saw maybe a brother killed, right? Who experienced it firsthand. So as a researcher, you want to get first-hand information. You want to get information from the best people who will provide you with accurate responses, accurate data. So that is the objective of your population. So you must ask yourself, these people who are going to provide me this information, are they the right people? Will they give me the right information? Now, it is rather unfortunate, so to say, that it becomes very difficult or cumbersome in application to get information from your target population, which means everybody. And so what researchers has always resorted to do is that take a sample. So a sample is just basically a subset. If this is your population, then you may decide to take a small section or a small segment, and so that forms your sample. So a sample is a subset of your population. Now, with quantitative studies, you don't just pick up a sample. You must ensure that your sample is a representative of your population. Remember, we stated earlier, the essence of quantitative studies is to do what? To collect data and analyze the data and test a theory or test a hypothesis. And so for you to test a hypothesis, you need enough data. And enough data means you should have a sample size that is a representation of your population. I've always said, statisticians are confident in using sample to represent the population because of what we call the central limit theorem and the normal distribution curve. We might not go into nitty-gritties of that for you to understand, but we always do it in our data analysis class where we actually go through some of this. And so what we do is that because of the principle of the central limit theorem, which says when you pick up a population, let's say this is your population, if you randomly divide your population into sub-segments, and so the mean of the population, the mean of the sample will be approximately equal to the mean of the population. It is on this ideology that researchers are able to use a sample, and when they do the sample, they can give you the confidence interval that the mean of the population must fall when they have the sample mean. And so in quantitative studies, we talk about the sample size being a representation of the population and must be large enough. There are different sampling techniques. We have random sampling, we have probability sampling, and non-probability sampling. And most of the times, for quantitative studies, you go for what? Probability sampling. And under probability sampling, we have simple random, we have stratified, we have cluster sampling, and so on and so forth. So it's important for you to understand. All of these are important. If you choose simple random, the most important thing about simple random is you must have a sampling frame. You must be able to have a sampling frame. And what I've noticed as a data analyst is that most students attempt, they use convenience and they're telling you a simple random. Simple random says you give equal chance for all the participants. That A participate doesn't automatically limit the chances of you participating, maybe because they come from the same home. No. Simple random, if element of the population has an equal chance. We have the aspect of it stratified, systematic, and cluster sampling. However, we cannot go into the nitty-gritties, and we equally have the non-probability sampling, like the quarter sampling, we have the purposive sampling, we have the convenience sampling, the snowball sampling. These are different sampling techniques, and all of them are relevant. We are not saying one is that much superior, because there are advantages and disadvantages. So if you choose, you must justify. I still come back to the aspect of justification on everything you do in your methodology section. So from there, you have to talk about instrumentation. Now, if you are from a pure science background, they may not just put methodology, at times they have what? Methods and material. So there are some things you have to see, methods and material. Now, the underlying ideology might still be the same, but you have to understand that pure sciences may have different terminologies, and these terminologies may interrelate in one way or the other. Now, instrumentation simply means how are you going to collect your data, right? Are you going to collect your data? Which techniques are you going to use to collect the data? And how are you going to do it? Are you going to use questionnaire? Are you going to use interview guides? Are you going to use checklists? Are you going to use maybe focus group discussion? Or what method or what tools are you using? And under the instrumentation, you equally have to explain, if it's a questionnaire, how is your questionnaire structured? Maybe in section 1 talks about demography, right? Demography is relevant because it's important for me reading your work to know who is talking. So that is why demography is most often we collect data with respect to demography. And you don't just bring in everything about demography, you bring in things that are relevant to the topic and relevant to answering your research questions. So you must also justify your technique. I choose to use questionnaire. Why are you using questionnaire? There must be a justification. I want to use a hybrid. I want to use questionnaire and interview. So I'm going for a kind of mixed method that allows me to do maybe triangulation when it comes to analysis, right? You must justify and bring in the advantages, disadvantages, and so on and so forth in a scientific way. So once you do that, how did you go about collecting your data? Was it self-administered? Did you use an online survey? Maybe SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, and so on and so forth. There is a need. Why you have to justify this thing? Because somebody should be able to look at your methodology and replicate it if the person wants to get a similar result. That's the essence of what? Justifying everything in your research methodology. And once you have done that, you can talk about reliability and validity. Now, we cannot really emphasize and talk much about reliability, but in brief, we can say validity says your data collection tool should be able to measure what it intends to measure. That's the aspect of reliability, validity. Your tool measures what you intend to measure. Now, there are different ways to ensure reliability, validity. Some talk about construct validity, content validity, phase validity. And many attempts you will ensure validity using what we call content validity index. You design your instrument and maybe look for experts and give them a scale for them to rate how you think that this particular question that I've asked will help me to attain this particular objective. And so maybe some 10 experts, they will indicate. Another person may say 1. Maybe the person strongly disagree or do not think that is able to. And somebody gives 5. From there, you calculate and see. When you have a higher validity index, then your instrument is good. And you can go ahead. And most of the time, when we talk about reliability, we have a brother or a sister, so to say, that goes with which is what? I mean, validity that goes with which is reliability. Reliability talks about consistency. If I use this instrument now and issue it again, will I have the same results? If I use it now and you come and take the instrument and use, will you have the same or similar result? It has to do with consistency. And there are different types of reliability that we will do. But one of the most commonly used reliability techniques is content validity, internal consistency, where we use different analytical techniques like the Conch bar alpha to calculate. You can use the speed hack, you can use the Goodman, and so on and so forth to check for that correlational relationship that exists between your variables. Unfortunately, we cannot go into details. And now comes method of data analysis. You have to analyze your data. You have to analyze your data. And so how you go about analyzing your data, you need to specify at this stage. Why that analytical techniques is important. This way you define your variables and how you identify, you measure your variables. So there are different analytical techniques. You have to analyze your data. You can use descriptive data. We can use descriptive, we can use inferential, and so on and so forth. Whatever technique you use, you must try to establish its relevance within your study. And so last under methodology, but not all, is ethical consideration. This is one of the most important aspects in a research study. How ethical were you as a researcher in carrying out the study? How ethical are you? Now, because your level of ethical would have a lot to do. What if you go and you bribe people to provide answers? Already your results are biased. What do you use? Maybe force measure, or maybe measure somebody provides answers under duress. So one of the things you need to indicate voluntary participation and anonymity in participation, which means people's identity should not be revealed, confidentiality of information, disclosure of the purpose of the study, and so on and so forth. Maybe there are other aspects of ethical consideration, like receiving authorization to collect data, and so you must indicate the ethical considerations that you applied in your study. So it's so important. Once you have done this, we collect your data and you go to the aspect of analysis, which is very, very important. And so in sum, this we have seen so far is that your research process begins from a thought. You identify a field, and once you identify a particular field, the next thing you want to do is to be able to establish your topic. A good research topic needs to have at least two variables, the dependent and the independent variable. That's the first thing. Now, for you to establish a topic, you have to look at it in terms of what has been in existence, and what is already, what is the current state of affairs, and what if something is not done will be a problem. And you identify and you establish your research topic. You review the background. We say the purpose of the background primarily is to educate your reader about your study. And that's why you have to maybe trace evolution of your problem. You have to define some key concepts. You have to establish a theoretical perspective. That's why I tell you, say these are the Marxisms, or the masses are those who follow the ideology of Marxism, and so on and so forth. You need to establish that. Then from there, you establish your problem statement, your objectives. You talk about significance of your study. You go to methodology, and so on and so forth. So having done that, once you have gotten to this stage, one of the things you have to do is to be able to now collect your data. And here you may need the services of a research assistant if you're not a statistician, if you're not versed with statistics. And so in either situation, the advice attempt is that whether you need a statistician all along to formulate your objectives, to maybe help you to, so that people work together hand in glove to be able to come up with a scientifically apt paper, and a statistician who understand how some of these things play a role. So with that, we go to the next part, which is Q&A. Thank you for your kind attention. We can now come in with questions. So you can unmute yourself and ask your question. And with that, I will take maybe some few questions and go. Before that, I will check some of the questions that were asked during the presentation. The literature review will be separate from introduction or with introduction. Now, the aspect of literature review being separate or different, in a thesis, the literature review most often is separated. But the introduction, especially the background, will carry aspects of literature review, because you need to establish, you don't write from space. One thing about research is that it's not head knowledge, it's not creative writing, it's not essay writing. The word read means you do it again and again, and search means you are seeking. So you have to search over and over. So you are not doing a creative writing, rather we're actually reviewing what others have done so that you identify a gap. It can be theoretical gap, geographical gap, empirical gap, and so on and so forth. So you must review literature. So even your introduction, we go with a lot of citations, but when you get to aspect of actually talking about empirical literature, some school of thought say you join and others separate. But most of the times, your introduction, as we've said, you have the background. Background will have some aspects of maybe bringing in citations to buttress your point, but we can't really say that is literature. But if the supervisor of the school requires you to join the two, then fine, you have to do so. That's what they've accepted. Whatever be, you need to understand what the content of literature review or the introduction requires, so that you know which one constitutes literature review, which one constitutes what? Introduction. The next question I find here says, is it important to use consequential framework in writing a dissertation? It will depend on the context, right? It depends on the context. Generally, like we started by saying, when you start up a research topic, you have to review literature to see what others have done. What others have done will inform you on the approach, the methodology you should apply. You either align with others or you deviate with others and you justify why you are taking this approach and not taking what others have been doing. There's a gap that you want to fill. So based on what others have done, it informs you. So the place of literature review cannot be overemphasized when we talk about what? Starting up a research work. So you must see how your work fits in with respect to what others have done. I hope I've answered that. What comes first, the research objectives or the research question? Well, there is no criteria to which one comes first. There's no criteria to which one comes first. Some people want to immediately from your problem, you bring up questions, right? From your problem, you bring up questions. And so some people will bring questions before, some will bring objectives. Which one ever you take, there's a one-on-one mapping. If you bring your questions first, you must ensure that your objectives follow suit and maybe your hypothesis following that approach, unless the school requires something different. However, for me, most of the times I want to put my questions first, because when I raise questions, and these are the questions I want to answer, I can formulate my question now as objectives and it will give me a direction. Remember, questions are key to help us know where we are going, and for us to know where we are going, we actually have to establish objectives. That's why there are some school of thoughts that we don't need objectives and questions in the same work. They all have the same underline. But the differences is in the structure, because one is a question that needs an answer. And to answer the question, you must set a goal. And the goal is like the objective that you have to establish. The next question, so can we say there are good or bad research topics? Yes. We have good research topics and we have bad research topics, right? A good research topic must be researchable. You can't just join variables, and your variables must have something in common. Your research topic must be relevant. Your research topic must be able to be measured. You cannot pick up a topic that you will not be able to quantify or to measure whatever you are doing. And so you cannot pick up a study that is seemingly you will not have literature to review what others have done. That's why at times I've seen that in an institution where you pick up a study, let's say assume that you have two variables, dependent and independent variables, and these two variables are not related in any way. Most of the time you find it difficult to carry out that study, because when you go to literature, there is nothing that people have done. So there's that necessity for you to see that whatever you are doing, there must be a kind of relationship between your variables in your study. There's a relationship. If we say that drinking water can rehydrate athletes, then it should be that there is either a theoretical underlying assumption that is what happens, or an empirical evidence, right? That's why we say you have to review literature, because some of those things, they inform you. So if there is nothing, no theory, no empirical, and you are trying to establish the two variables, it may become very difficult for you to actually conduct your study. Okay, question. Yeah. Now the next question says, so example of ethical consideration. I think with under ethical consideration, I mentioned the aspect of when you want to establish one of the things you need to do is to, one, when you meet your participants or your respondents, you need to, one, indicate the purpose of the study. Is it for academic purposes? Is it a company that wants to solve a problem or whatsoever? You need to disclose the purpose of the study. The purpose of disclosing the reason why you disclose the purpose of the study is to encourage the participant to see whether he or she will be willing to provide information. And once you do that, you also need to tell the participant about confidentiality. If the person providing you this information, you will keep it confidential. And one of the ways you want to ensure confidentiality is to ensure that the person's identity is not revealed. When you collect data, that's why I tell you assign codes, right? Instead of taking people's name. If somebody was Peter, you may give A, B, C, D, or you may give, maybe if Peter is John Peter, you may just give one of the names so that we cannot really know which of the Peters. If it's an institution may not want to provide their data, and so what they simply have to do, you need to disguise the name of that institution. Those are some aspects of ethical consideration. Maybe taking a letter of authorization to go and collect data if you are from a university, as well as seeking authorization from the institution to provide you data. Those are some aspects of ethical consideration, and ensuring that even participation is voluntary. I can accept to participate in the study, and if I don't feel as to participate, I do what? I said, no, I will not participate, and I will not be obliged, right? So those are examples of ethical consideration that you must adapt as a researcher. I have a question, nice presentation. If you could please answer about my question about literature review. Please, you can, if I've not answered the question. There will be other webinars as well about writing. Yes, like we started, if you check from the introduction, we said this is 01 seminar. This is the first seminar. And at the end of the day, we equally want to appreciate your feedback. If you can give us a feedback how you went. We know when we started, there was issues, network challenges, and many others. You give us feedback so that next time we'll be able to do better. So basically, there will be many other webinars where we try as much as possible to educate on thesis writing. We'll talk about thesis writing, how to go about looking for literature review, how to handle your methodology, how data analysis can be done. And we equally have to talk about papers, writing for publications, dealing with plagiarism, and so on and so forth. So we have a series of webinars that we will have as we progress. Okay, let's see. Please, how do we determine the type of test to use in testing a hypothesis? It goes back to your research objectives and the nature of data. Now, as a data analyst, and training students on how to become statisticians, we take a lot of time to tell you what are the ingredients you must consider before checking or analyzing your data. For instance, you need to be able to determine the nature of your variables. Are they categorical or continuous? You need to understand whether your data is parametric or non-parametric. You need to be able to see whether you're dealing with paired data or independent data, and so on and so forth. That goes back to the nature of data you've collected, as well as your research hypothesis or questions that you have to answer. So there is a chain process. So you must understand the whole process, and that will inform you on which analytical technique to use, whether you are using regression, you are using maybe correlation, you are using logistic regression, hierarchical regression, you are using Anovas, you are using independent sample t-test, paired sample, one sample, you are using chi-square, and maybe Fisher exact test, and so on and so forth. They all has a lot to do with the nature of the data and your research hypotheses that you have. I think, yes, any other question again? If somebody has a question, we'll appreciate if you can ask the question. So basically, like I said, this program, please go ahead and ask a question, every question. We have some few more minutes for questions. But we want to say that you can check on us on Facebook, on our Facebook page, First Links Academy, or on YouTube, First Links Academy. Because we have series of videos. While we are having webinars, we also have to upload videos So for people to be able to equally follow and learn, you can learn on your own. You may not necessarily only participate, but stay in touch. And if you desire a certificate, I'm sure the team will be ready to send one for you. And maybe they will ask a charge for that. I don't know the decision of the. What are good and helpful tools for writing, if you can mention some? As a researcher, just in brief, you for a scientist and a scholar, you need to have Mendeley, or at least one technique that helps you in referencing. We equally need one grammary technique, for instance, grammary, and there are so many others depending on what you want to do. Maybe if you are a data analyst, you need analytical tools, and so they are all important for you. So it's important for you to see how you try to use this. I think I've said the aspect of consequential. I said with respect to this question, my answer says it is important, but you must justify the relevance why you need it in your work. Are there others that have used it, or you want to be the first to pioneer? Give a justification. And so, like I said, you review literature to inform you on what others have done, right? So the conceptual framework that you are using is important because it links the relationship between your variable, unless you mean something else. So in whatever situation you want to be able to understand, which technician is best to write in terms of grammar? I don't get your question. You can do a voice recording, or which technique is best used to write in terms of grammar? Grammar is one of the best used technique for I think, to help you improve your writing skills. Grammarly, we have the free version and we have the paid version. So if you have your resources, you can go for the full version. If you don't have, they have the free version. The only challenge is that the free version is will be limited, but those are great techniques used for analysis. So any more questions from your end? What is the difference between a study? What is the main difference between a survey as a study design and a cross-sectional study? Okay. Now, the first thing is that we have a survey. The first thing is that we have survey as a research design. Now, a cross-sectional study is a one-time study. The opposite of a cross-sectional study is longitudinal. If you want to study something that has taken years, for instance, you are studying the performance of a company or the GDP of a country for maybe 30 years, that is a longitudinal study because you are basically taking data. But when you administer a questionnaire, it's a survey because you get people's opinion and it's just a one-time study, right? So cross-sectional has to do with periodic. It can be a one-time study or a study over time. If it is a one-time, it's cross-sectional. If it's a study over time, it's what? Longitudinal. Yet it can still be a survey because you can survey people's opinion for something this year, and next year you come and survey their opinion. You survey for 5 years. That will still be what? A survey study. A survey study just simply means to get people's opinion. People give their opinion with respect to whatever you are working on. That's the idea about survey studies. Well, for research data, how to analyze data, we've not talked about data analysis. Data analysis is a whole lot game. And like I said, I would recommend you sign up to our YouTube channel so that you can receive, even on our Facebook page, you'll be receiving updates on data analysis as well. Currently, we just started our course 7 for data analysis, and we are still on basic principles of statistics. So we are just a single class. You may join if you want to really learn how to analyze data for yourself, because there is a lot to do when it comes to data analysis. We cannot just give you a quick method on how to analyze data. But like I said, before you actually sit down to analyze your data, you must take into account the nature of the data, the type of the data, maybe the data is parametric or non-parametric, the type of variables you have, and so on and so forth. So there's so many things to take into account before you analyze the data. So it's a whole lot process that we will see with subsequent discussions, or if you want to participate in our data analysis class, I believe it's another opportunity for you to equally learn how to analyze data. And before we go, there is something I want to say. If you are in academics, if you are in the field of academics, there's one thing that I must say that is very, very important for you to understand. All universities around the world, they do three things. One, what they do is that they teach, they write, and they publish. So, sorry for now. Sorry for that. We are saying that each university, whether it's Harvard, whether it's Cambridge, University of Buya, or any university, does principally three things: they teach, they write, and publish. And it's very, very important for you to understand how these things play a role. There is a slogan that says publish or perish. It's very, very important for you to understand that you need to publish. But for you to be able to publish, there's a need for you to learn how to write. And that's why we discovered, especially in African context, we've discovered that we have been downloading a lot. And so we were trying to change the paradigm by trying to encourage people to write, and not only write, to be able to publish, because there is a lot that we have. We write a lot of articles. We can write wonderful articles. We can tell the African story. We can story African scenarios, develop African theories in the African context, and contribute to the world. But to do that, we need to follow scientific procedures for it to be relevant. And that's why we're taking series of lectures, training on data analysis, because it's a chain process. You cannot be a good researcher when you don't know how data is analyzed, how to collect the right data, how to get the right sample size, how to get the right sample technique, and so on and so forth. You cannot be a right data analysis supervisor when you don't know how data is analyzed. When a student brings data, you just look at it, whether the data is fake or whether there are bugs in the data, when the analytical technique used is wrong or right. So it is important for us to learn how to do this. And that's the essence of these presentations that we are having. We have so many of them, and we believe that as time progresses, we will have a new generation of statisticians that will be able to contribute a lot to the world of data analysis. So without any question, I'm sure I will give room for my colleague to sit and share more about Facilin. So you learn more about Facilin, you can stay in touch. So you will have the videos will be on our YouTube channel, as well as the slides. We'll send the slides, and if you need
Hello, good evening. We have come to the end of our presentation, and we have reacted with questions. I don't know whether we have more questions again. You can keep bringing them. We can write you in our platform, in our WhatsApp platform, so that our teacher can bring them up. We can respond to them later. Are we there? So about us, Facilink's Academy is a body that is created to work and close the gap between the job market and the world educational system through practical skills. We are guided with passion towards supporting and building skills that meet current global market needs. Our trainings started since 2019, especially for the data analysis. But our team of workers have been experienced in this field since 2012. As we heard from our teacher, he has been in the field of research and data analysis since 2012. And this has enabled him to build a lot of experience through face-to-face interaction with students, researchers, even those writing articles from different levels of education. As such, as we all heard from him, the need for such platforms and such trainings and webinars has actually been gathered from a series of experience, a series of challenges, series of issues that people have brought up to him. So we run trainings both online and offline on data analysis with SPSS and Excel. We have data science with R. We have project management. We have research methodology and many others that are still on the pipeline. So please, that's what you can know for now about us, and subsequently we'll present more in our webinars that we'll bring up. We have our YouTube channel, Thesis Academy. You can subscribe. There is the link we'll send again after this. Please you subscribe to it so that I can follow our videos. We equally, those who might not have asked their questions now, you send even our email address. You can give your feedback about the webinar, how it went, proposals on subsequent webinars, and maybe challenges that were not handled in the course of it. We equally, their certificates will be ready for those who need it. And please, you just need to pay a little amount, maybe to get an if version of it, especially for those who are not around us. We'll communicate the amount soon, please. So that notwithstanding, we think we have come to the end of our seminar. And if you don't have any reactions, you don't have any questions, you don't have any contributions, we thank you so much for joining us. And we say we'll meet subsequently in the next series and edition.
Please, thank you, and see you as we stay in touch and become the best, succeed in your dissertation.